When I first started dental school, I had to learn new lingo such as what's an MOD amalgam. Also, when I got into real estate investing, I had to learn some of the most frequently used terms such as IRR, cap rate, and cash on cash return. I quickly realized that if I want to be successful, one of the most important ones to know about was the cash on cash return. Lucky for you, in this video, we're going to define what a cash on cash return is. We'll take a look at the formula, how to calculate it, and finally, we'll look at a couple of examples to help you quickly understand how to use it during your real estate investing journey. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Jeff Anzalone, a periodontist that's on a mission to get you out of the rat race with passive income creation, not having to rely on your 401k. You can download the guide that I put together for you below this video. Let's start off by answering the question, what exactly is a cash on cash return? Well, cash on cash return is an annual measure of an investor's earnings on a property compared to the amount that they initially spent to purchase it and make it operational. In other words, it's nothing more than the return on capital invested into a rental property. It's also known as cash in equals the cash coming out. This is especially useful when trying to get a very accurate picture of the amount of cash flow a property has, because we want to know for every dollar we put into an investment, what do we get out of it in return? So to sum it up, it's the relationship between a property's actual cash flow and the initial investment put in. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how exactly to calculate this. So in order to calculate, then what you want to do is you want to take the annual cash flow from a property, okay? So you add up the annual gross rent intake, all the people that are paying you rent. You want to look at all the rent as well as any other income received from the property. This could be like maybe laundry facilities you have, covered parking, storage units, things like that. And then this will give you the entire or the gross income from your property. Next, you want to subtract out all the operating expenses and the annual debt service, the mortgage, to obtain the NOI, the net operating income. All right. Some examples of expenses are if you have maintenance, utilities, property management, stuff like that. So next, you want to take the NOI. So you've got all of your income, then you've got your expenses. That gives you your NOI, your net operating income, and then you want to divide that by the amount of money that you've put into the property. The result is the cash on cash return. All right, so I'm real big on syndications. So let's use the example of apartment syndication, okay? And this is where you're going to have your sponsor, your general partner, and then you, the limited partner, come together to purchase an apartment. All right, in this situation, the sponsor group, they purchase an apartment complex and they pay 10 million bucks for it, okay? So the sponsors, the limited partners, they go together and this is what they buy. Those two groups together, they put in $2.5 million in the deal, and then the remaining $7.5 million is financed. So aside from the down payment, $200,000 was actually paid in closing costs, which brings the total investment, general partners and limited partners, total investment in the $10 million apartment, $2.7 million. Now, after the first year of operations, the annual rent revenue for basically from the property was 1.1 million. All right. Regarding the expenses, basically the mortgage payments, they total $550,000 plus $200,000 was spent on other operating expenses and improvements. Now remember, to determine the cash on cash return, you must first calculate the annual cash flow from the investment. So this is what that looks like. Remember, you got the gross revenue, which was the $1.1 million, total expenses. Remember, you had the $500,000. Supposed to be, $550,000. Let me change that. So 550. Then you had $200,000, which gave you $750,000. So 1.1 million minus $750,000, that gives you the annual net cash flow, which is $350,000. Now we divide the annual net cash flow by the equity invested to determine the cash on cash return. So we have the $350,000. So you take our formula, net operating income, $350,000 The amount invested, remember, was a 2.7 million. Divide the two together, and we get 12.9%. So the properties, so the cash on cash return in this is roughly 13%. So this tells us that the property's annual profit is going to be roughly 13% of the cash initially invested. Now, let's look at three more examples of how this cash on cash return are calculated in some different real estate scenarios. So, example number one. Dr. A decides to get into the real estate investing game as he's tired of his patients always telling him, hey, no offense, but I just hate going to the dentist. So he finds a nicely kept single family home and he actually writes a check for the full amount of $250,000, which is what the asking price on this was. So Dr. A, single family home, $250,000. All right. It when he purchased it, it has a history of cash flowing $20,000 a year, which gives him this calculation: $20,000 cash, the net operating income divided by $250,000. He will get an 8% cash on cash return. Next, we're going to go to example number two. Now, this is Dr. R. Now, Dr. R, he also finds a single family home, which he purchases again, $250,000 all cash. But unlike the first example, it needs a little bit of renovations. So he has to actually come out of pocket $50,000 for the repair, and it has an annual cash flow of $25,000. So you have the $50,000 in repairs, annual cash flow $25,000 divided by the $300,000 because he spent $250 plus $50, $300,000. 25K divided by 300K is 8.3% cash on cash return. And our last example is this, Dr. N. Now, Dr. N is only 2 years out of his radiology residency, and he also wants to join his partner, Dr. R, right here in real estate investing because he doesn't want to treat patients his whole life. Now, because he's just out of his residency, he's not able to write a check for the full amount like Dr. R did. So what he does, he decides to use leverage instead. He's actually able to put down, he finds a duplex. He's able to put down $50,000 on a duplex that has a $10,000 annual cash flow after debt. Okay, so after he's paid his mortgage and all that, $10,000. So $10,000 divided by the 50K he put down, he actually has 20% cash on cash return. Thus, you see the power of leverage. So what are some of the benefits? So let's talk about the three main benefits of cash on cash return. Number one, property selection. One of the most practical uses of this return has to do with the selection of a property. Now, using it allows you to perform a very fast side-by-side analysis of multiple deals based on the information available, such as if they give you their operating expenses, the rent roll, and other seller-provided financials. Second, financing cost. Now, another benefit of using the cash on cash return is that it factors in the cost of financing or getting debt. This helps them determine what terms they're going to need in order to achieve maybe a certain cash on cash return. Typically, the cash on cash return is lower when an investor has more equity in a deal versus less when they have less equity in the deal, which we saw right here. So it was lower for him because he had more equity in the deal. He wrote the check versus higher here because he has less money in the deal. He only put $50,000 down. And remember that also the cost of the financing for a property can also impact the cash on cash return. And the third benefit are insights to a property's expense profile. Now, the cash on cash returns provide useful insights to a property's expense profile. Now, those with higher expenses, okay, properties with higher expenses are going to result in lower cash on cash returns. So by knowing the expenses beforehand, a prospective buyer could determine if there are possible cost savings that could be implemented before they buy the property in order to increase the return. So how is a cash on cash return different from some of the other metrics out there? So now, hopefully you're familiar with what a cash on cash return is and how to calculate it. So let's look at it based on four other common financial metrics that's typically used to evaluate a property's performance. First one is going to be and we talked about this a little bit briefly, net operating income. Remember, you get that subtracting the expenses from the income. All right. Now, remember, when performing this calculation, the debt service is not included, whereas in the cash on cash return, it does include it. Okay. Number two, cap rate. And the cap rate is used to indicate the rate of return expected for a particular property that you're going to buy. So investors use this metric to compare properties and estimate their potential ROI for a particular asset. Typically, the higher the cap rate, the higher the projected profitability, and are calculated by basically you take the net operating income and you divide that by the market value of the property. Third is the internal rate of return, or IRR. And this is an estimate of the value that a property generates during the time frame that you own it. So most of the syndications that I'm in are anywhere from a 3 to a 6 year time hold period. So the internal rate of return would be the estimate that basically that time, let's say I'm in it for 5 years, so that would be an estimate of the 5 years while I'm holding or I'm investing in this property, what would my rate of return be? And the IRR is the percentage of interest you earn on each dollar you've invested in a property, again, over this entire holding period. Now, when it comes to involving real estate, as you know, time is money, right? So the longer an investor's money is tied up, the lower the IRR will be and the worse the investment will perform. So the primary differences between the cash on cash returns and the IRR is that the IRR is based on total income earned through this ownership cycle, whereas with the cash on cash returns, it's just annually. And really, when you ask people, and I talk to syndicators and I ask them, about different formulas that we can use, usually they tell me it's pretty complex to figure it out because you have a lot of moving parts. So usually they have some sort of financial calculator set up. They could have an Excel spreadsheet. You can do a Google search to find your own IRR calculator to use. And the fourth would be the ROI, or the return on investment. This actually measures the profit made on a property. And it's calculated by comparing the amount invested in a property, including the initial purchase price, plus any further cost to its current value. So let's take a look at the formula. So we have the current market value, subtract that by what you paid for the investment. So once you get that number, then you divide it by the cost of the investment. So for instance, if you paid $500,000 for, let's say, a self-storage complex last year, and it incurred no capital expenses, all right, so you paid 500 grand for it, it incurred no capital expenses, and you found out that it's worth $600,000. So you take market value, subtract it from what you paid for it, that's $100,000, divide that by what you paid for it initially, that will give you the ROI. And in this case, 20%, not too bad. Now, question, now that you know all of this, what is a good cash on cash return? Is it 8%, 10%, 20%, what? So as you can imagine, most investors, they want to know this, right? Unfortunately, there's no specific rule of thumb regarding actually what constitutes a good cash on cash return, because it comes down to you, the individual investor, because you're going to have different preferences and goals than somebody else. Because some seasoned investors, they feel that a projected cash on cash return of maybe 8, 10, 12%, let's say 8 to 12% is good, while others think that 5 to 7% is acceptable depending on the market. Now, if you have people that are getting closer to retirement and they want less risk, okay, they're going to have a different investment goals than somebody that are maybe getting right out of their training, have decades to work, and can take on more risk. Okay. Again, it's all about meeting the particular investor's investment objectives. Now, if you only want deals over 10%, then just look at that. Just search for those. If you want 6%, then only focus on those. So you have to do what's right for you, because only you know what your risk tolerance is. based on your goals that you set, because you're going to want to be able to sleep better knowing that you're doing what's right for you and your family. So now you should understand what the cash on cash return is. And it's basically, it's a metric that can be used to guide you to which investment will be more or less profitable when compared to others. Now, my goal on this channel is to educate you about the ins and outs of real estate investing, specifically passive investing, because who has time or wants to deal with tenants, right? Who wants to deal with the headaches? Now, as I continue to learn myself, my goal for you and for this channel is to pass on what I'm learning through writing blog articles and doing these videos, pass on this education to you, pass along my wins, plus one pass along my losses as well. And then that way you can take that and make an educated decision on, again, what's best for your investment goals. And the first step in this vetting process starts with the numbers. And then the cash on cash return is one of the ones you should start with. And it's a pretty easy one to start with as well. And speaking of investment goals, I've put together for you my personal investment strategy for wealth creation, which you can catch over here. And I'll see you over there. Take care.